My stepfather tried to erase me from family photos and said, "You were never really part of us anyway." I replaced his name on the deed, now he's out of the house. I'll never forget the day Mom came home glowing like I hadn't seen in years. "I met someone, Garrett," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. She was in her early 50s but looked a good 10 years younger, thanks to her energy and spirit. "His name is Horace, and he's, well, I don't even know where to start. He's just wonderful." I had always been protective of her, especially after Dad passed when I was just 8. We'd made it work together, just us, in our small Asheville house with a great view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. When she first mentioned Horace, I couldn't help but feel skeptical, though I tried not to show it. "He's got this quiet strength," she continued, looking a little embarrassed, like a teenager admitting her first crush. "I know he seems a bit stiff, but he's got a good heart. And he listens, Garrett. He really listens." "Okay, Mom," I said, laughing, trying to hide my concern. "As long as he makes you happy." We met at her favorite little diner on the edge of town. Horace came across as polite, reserved, almost too reserved, the kind of guy you wouldn't notice in a crowd. He had this stern, serious face, gray at the temples, and he dressed like he'd just come from a corporate meeting even though he was supposedly retired. But he shook my hand firmly and made eye contact. "Garrett," he said in this deep, gravelly voice, "I've heard so much about you. Your mom has every reason to be proud." It was strange to hear him complimenting me, but I appreciated the effort. I wanted things to work, especially for Mom's sake. And for the first few months, things did seem to work. Horace wasn't exactly warm, but he was respectful, bringing Mom flowers every week and even showing interest in my job and hobbies. Then came the wedding, a small affair up in the mountains, just close family and friends. I stood next to Mom, wearing a forced smile, but a small part of me felt off. Like I was losing something in the process of gaining a new family member. Still, I pushed it aside. "Garrett, I know this is a big change," Mom had said, squeezing my hand. "But you'll always be my son. Nothing will ever change that." And so, life went on. We'd have Sunday dinners, go on little family outings, even the occasional movie night where Horace would sit stiffly on the sofa, laughing in his strange, uncomfortable way at Mom's favorite comedies. For a while, I thought we might make it as a family. But then, bit by bit, Horace's real nature started to emerge. It began subtly, almost so subtly I wondered if I was imagining it. Little comments, sideways glances. One night after dinner, I was helping Mom clean up when Horace came into the kitchen, looking down his nose at me like he'd found a stray cat on his property. "So, Garrett," he started in that infuriating, formal tone he had, "what are your plans? I mean, you're a grown man living with your mother. Surely, you have aspirations beyond, well, here." I looked up, surprised by his bluntness. "Actually, Horace, I'm here because Mom needs me. She's still recovering from her fall." He waved his hand dismissively, giving a quick glance toward Mom. "Sabine's stronger than you think. And we could all use a little breathing room. Don't you agree?" Mom looked uncomfortable, caught between the two of us. "Horace, Garrett's here because he wants to be. We've been through a lot together." He gave a small, insincere smile, and I knew, in that moment, that I wasn't welcome. But for Mom's sake, I swallowed my pride and stayed. Over the next few months, things escalated. It wasn't just the comments anymore. Horace started making decisions without involving me or even consulting Mom. He replaced the photos in the living room, taking down pictures of my dad and me and putting up stiff, staged family portraits of his own relatives. He'd make offhand comments like, "Our home feels more refined without all that clutter, doesn't it?" I tried to keep my cool, but each change felt like a little piece of my life was being erased. One night, I confronted him about it, hoping for a civil conversation. "Horace, I know you like things a certain way, but this is my mom's house too," I said, keeping my voice steady. He didn't even look up from his book. "Garrett, don't be childish. Sabine and I are trying to create a life together. You're old enough to understand that sometimes, in marriage, compromises must be made." "Yeah, but this feels less like a compromise and more like erasing us," I shot back, unable to hold back my frustration. He finally looked at me, his face impassive. "Garrett, you need to grow up. You're clinging to the past, and it's not healthy for anyone." I stormed out of the room, unable to believe he'd spoken to me that way. I went to Mom, trying to explain how I felt, but she just looked tired. "Garrett, please, just try to get along with him. He's good to me. He's a little particular, but he means well." I saw then that Mom was under his thumb. She didn't want to admit it, maybe didn't even realize it, but she was afraid to rock the boat. I bit my tongue, trying to hold on for her sake. Then came Christmas, and the infamous family photo incident. Horace had planned a big gathering, inviting his side of the family, people I barely knew, while sidelining most of my mom's family. I was on edge all evening, feeling like an outsider in my own home, but I held it together. I had to, for Mom. As everyone gathered for the family photo, Horace took control, arranging everyone just so. I went to stand beside Mom, but he stopped me with a look that could have frozen water. "Garrett, why don't you sit this one out?" "What?" I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face stayed stone cold. "You're joking, right?" He gave a condescending little chuckle. "Garrett, this is a family photo. Sabine and I. Well, you understand." I didn't understand. I stood there, shocked, not knowing what to say. My mom reached out to me, her face pale, but Horace stepped between us, blocking her. "Horace, he's my son," she said, her voice shaking. "He belongs in this photo." His voice was calm, dismissive. "Sabine, let's not make a scene. It's just a photo. He'll understand. Won't you, Garrett?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, feeling all eyes on me. "You don't get to tell me I'm not part of this family," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't get to erase me." Horace gave a small smirk, barely concealed. "Garrett, it's time you faced reality. You were never really part of us anyway." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I thought Mom would snap. I saw her hand twitch, like she wanted to grab him, to scream at him. But she didn't. She just stood there, looking torn, caught between the man she loved and the son she'd raised alone. The camera clicked, capturing a photo of a family I wasn't part of. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay there, not after what he'd said. Mom called me over and over, her voice desperate, begging me to come back, promising she'd talk to him. But I knew she wouldn't, or if she did, he'd just twist her words, manipulate her back into submission. Horace had her wrapped around his little finger, and I didn't see a way out for either of us. I crashed with a friend, barely able to sleep, wondering how things had gotten so twisted. I wanted to protect her, but I also knew she had to see the truth for herself. Days turned into weeks, and I started piecing my life back together, getting a job, finding a tiny apartment. Mom called every day, her voice full of regret, promising things were better now that Horace had agreed to compromise. But one day, when I stopped by the house to pick up some of my things, I saw the truth. Horace had started redecorating, taking down the last of my dad's photos, my childhood memorabilia, anything that reminded him of my place in Mom's life. It was like I'd never even lived there. I confronted Mom, begging her to see what he was doing, but she just looked tired. "Garrett, it's just things. They're just things." "No, Mom. It's not just things. It's us. He's trying to erase us." She wouldn't hear it. I could see the exhaustion, the way she was shrinking under Horace's constant control. And I knew I had to do something, even if she wasn't ready to see it. I started digging, looking into the house, into the finances. Horace had manipulated his way into every corner of her life, but there was one thing he hadn't counted on: my dad's name was still on the deed. Horace had never added his own name. When I discovered my dad's name was still on the deed, a plan started forming. It was risky and felt almost cruel, but the anger inside me, at Horace, at how he'd controlled my mom, was a fire I couldn't put out. I went back to my apartment that night and lay awake, thinking it all through. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. I was going to take back what was ours. The next day, I called my mom. I asked her to meet me, just us, at a small coffee shop we used to go to when I was a kid. She seemed relieved that I wanted to see her, probably hoping things would go back to normal. As soon as we sat down, I got straight to the point. "Mom, I need you to come with me to see a lawyer. I want to make sure you're protected if something ever happened." She looked at me, confused. "Garrett, I don't think that's necessary. Horace. He'd never leave me with nothing." I leaned in, my voice soft but firm. "Mom, I know you love him, but things can change fast. You've already lost so much in that house. Just humor me, please." She hesitated, then finally nodded. "All right, if it'll make you feel better." That afternoon, we went to the lawyer's office. I'd already made an appointment and explained the situation, so when we arrived, the lawyer was ready. He laid it all out for her, explaining how vulnerable she was if Horace ever decided to leave or force her out. Mom looked pale, clearly processing everything for the first time. The lawyer took out the deed and explained how simple it would be to add my name. With Dad gone, Mom had inherited everything, and she could pass it to anyone she wanted. Legally, Horace had no claim, but adding me to the deed would make it even harder for him to ever control the property. She looked at me, worry and hope mixed in her eyes. "Garrett," she said quietly, "are you sure about this?" "Mom," I said, taking her hand, "I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for you. He can't take this from us." In the end, she signed. I could tell it hurt her, like she was betraying him in some way. But once the papers were done, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but now we had the upper hand. I didn't tell Horace right away. I let things simmer, waiting for the right moment. A week later, he came home and found me in the living room, helping Mom rearrange her things back to how they used to be. He walked in, his face turning red as he saw me hanging up a photo of Dad in its rightful place. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight. "Just putting back some things," I said, smiling calmly. "Family photos." His jaw clenched. "I don't think that's necessary. Sabine and I agreed to keep things simple." Mom looked at him, her face determined. "Actually, Horace, I didn't agree to anything. These things belong here. This is my home too." He gave a cold, empty laugh. "Your home? Sabine, don't be ridiculous. We're a team, remember?" "That's interesting," I said, stepping forward, "because according to the deed, it's her home, and now, mine too." His face froze, like he'd been slapped. "What are you talking about?" Mom met his gaze, her voice steady but sad. "Garrett and I added his name to the deed. This house was mine, Horace. It was always mine, and you know it." He tried to laugh it off, tried to dismiss it, but I could see the panic in his eyes. He'd been acting like he owned everything, like he could just kick us out whenever he wanted. But now he knew he was trapped. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "If that's how you want it. But let's not forget, Sabine, you need me. You wouldn't even know where to start without me." Mom surprised us both when she said, "I'll manage, Horace. I was doing fine before you came along." It was like something snapped in him. He stormed out of the house, muttering under his breath, and didn't come back for days. Mom was shaken but relieved, and for the first time, I saw her standing up for herself. A few days later, he finally returned, looking worn and defeated. He tried to charm her, saying all the right things, promising to change, to make things work, but this time, Mom didn't budge. She told him he could stay until he found a place, but his control over the house, and over her, was gone. He tried every trick he knew. He called her, left flowers on the doorstep, even brought gifts for me, hoping to sway us both. But it was too late. Mom and I had made our choice, and he was out of options. One morning, he showed up in the kitchen, trying one last plea. "Sabine," he said, putting on his most sincere face, "I was wrong. I know I pushed too hard. I just wanted to make things ours." Mom looked him squarely in the eye, calm and resolute. "Horace, I loved you. I wanted us to build a life together. But I see now that you were trying to erase the life I already had. And that's not something I can forgive." I couldn't help but admire her strength, the way she'd finally found her voice after so many years. And as Horace packed up his things and walked out of the house for the last time, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't felt in ages. He turned to look back one more time, maybe expecting us to stop him, to give him one last chance. But Mom and I stood firm, watching as he walked down the driveway, his head hanging low, finally realizing he'd lost everything he'd tried to control. When he was gone, Mom turned to me, a small smile playing on her lips. "Garrett, I think it's time we redecorate." I grinned, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Sounds like a plan, Mom." Together, we filled the house with memories again, the ones that mattered, the ones Horace could never take from us.